We are celebrating 100 episodes, and it feels totally crazy. So today, I'm really honored and proud to have two people come on. One of them is my friend, and both my friends, hopefully. But Thomas Olivier is going to be the first guest coming tonight, and he's the founder of GenSmart, and he'll talk a bit more about that. But it's a health tech startup that just came runner-up in, was it Prague? Vienna, there you go. Vienna startup, out of 2,500 startups, Thomas' startup was selected, and what he's doing is truly incredible, and we're going to talk about the genes and the DNA. So if you could please give me a warm welcome and join me to welcome Thomas on stage, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you. I feel like we should shake hands like in the, I don't know, Sean's our technician at the back, so you can blame anything on me. Cool. So Thomas, first of all, thank you so much for agreeing. This is like a week ago. We were having a barbecue, and I looked at Thomas. I said, "Hey, it'd be so cool to talk about your business on the live event." So thanks for being here.
Thank
I
you
really
for
appreciate
having
that.
me here, and thank you for you to be here.
Yeah. So here's something that I didn't know that Thomas told me. Who's here is afraid of public speaking? Raise your hand. Like if the idea of going on stage and talking to 1,000 people would be the worst thing ever. Raise your hand. It's okay. Okay, cool. So it turns out there may be a gene related to that might explain why you're actually afraid of public speaking. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, it would be the combination of a few, but yeah.
Yeah, cool. So tell us a bit more about, so you're into looking at the DNA composition and genetics, and you're trying to make sense of how that can inform better decisions in terms of what we eat and how we move.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to achieve really is to create this platform where you could have your digital representation of yourself. We start with DNA, but we actually want to expand a lot more. But DNA, why? Because we are, you just have to look in this room. We're all 99.9 different. Similar, sorry, but 0.1% are the same. But the 0.1% is actually up to 4 million different genes. So this is to give you a picture of how big that is.
Everyone's 4 million genes. How big are we talking about? If you had to make a conceptual representation of that so people can get it.
For you to understand, maybe the good way of understanding this is at the cellular level, the number of cells you have on each body. If I throw that in the sky, right, you will have more cells that you will have stars in the whole universe. But also in each and every single cells of this, you have 6 foot tall of DNA. So who is about 6 foot tall here?
Who's 6 foot tall?
Can you stand up?
Do you mind standing up?
So you have 32 trillion of this size here, right? So that's quite huge.
That's a lot of genes.
That's a lot of genes. Yeah. So it's enough to go to the moon and back twice.
Yeah. But it's been amazing. I don't know if anybody here has kind of heard there's been this big race against understanding our genomics, and you look at 23andMe and you look at all these kind of different companies that have come up, and then you decided to launch GenSmart. Yeah. So what was the idea behind GenSmart?
Well, the first idea behind GenSmart, first, as you said, is this race of getting your own data, your genetic data, and the thing is the cost of sequencing your genome, which is the composition of all your genes, has dropped 100 million times, right? To give you another example, it's like you're filling up your car in 98 of petrol or gas, and then you wait a bit until now, and you can go to the moon and back twice. So that means that now we can have access to all those data and try to make sense of it. And the reason why I've created GenSmart is because we collect a lot of data, but nobody really help you to make sense of those data. So there's a lot of company that you can actually make have your DNA tested, and you will get the result.
By the way, just a second. Anybody here's done the DNA testing? Anybody done experiment? Yeah, hands up. Cool. Yeah. So what Thomas is talking about is that you can now, and actually GenSmart does it now as well, but you can actually order a pack, this little kind of pack that comes, and you swab some saliva, send it to a lab, and then you wait, a little while, and then they send back some information about basically what you're made of. Now, there was a bit of an awkward, embarrassing moment when that happened, is that I realized that I was actually 62% British. and Irish, and only 20% French, kind of German. And so I had to have a conversation with my mother about this. And I said, Mother, I thought Dad was French, and you're British, so is there an adult conversation we need to have? Well, two things happened. First, there's no way that I'm not my dad's son. If you saw my dad, you can ask my partner. I'm the spitting image of him. Second of all, it turns out because this family were from the north, genetically speaking, a lot of people from north of France had Celtic roots and British origin. So that was fascinating.
Yeah, it's the same for me actually, because I'm also coming from the same area as Mark, and it's quite fascinating. I mean, the heredity of the I'm actually more German than French.
Sorry to hear that. I love you, honey. So sorry. So and then you had this idea of basically, because you talk about data, right? And I know that this is something that's really important. Anybody received any emails about GDPR? Does that sound?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody like? Don't we love them all? Yeah. But it's an important. Yes. We're talking about an important issue, right? We're talking about like data protection and actually ownership. And David, this is something that we've talked about before in the past, and something that I know that you believe we'll talk about. But there's a fascinating twist that you want to tell people about what you can do with your own data and how we should actually be owning our data.
Well, the thing is, your own data, big corporations have been using them for decades already. But now it's time to regain ownership of your data, and the genetic and the whole genome and genomic in general, and all your health data should be used for you to be empowered on how to optimize your health, because we are dying of preventable diseases. Billions of people, 1 out of 4 people in the UK died of diseases that are totally preventable by changing your lifestyle, your diet, and your environment. And this is what the genetic story tells us, is actually give you certain predisposition to certain diseases. But what we understand is it's not because you have a predisposition that you will actually develop the disease associated to it.
Yeah, I love what you say, because one of the things I learned about Thomas is that technically Thomas is meant to be obese. Right? And so, and he'll tell you a bit more about that, but you were actually a national champion in France of swimming when you were 15. Yeah. And tell us a bit more about, what does that mean when you say about, like, it's not because you have a certain gene that it means that it will certainly express itself?
Yeah, well, it's all about your lifestyle and environment. So you will have predisposition to certain things, but it's actually what the inputs, right, that you will put in those cells that will actually give you the results. And the idea here is to understand what makes you, different from someone else, and what are your predisposition, and what can you do to actually alter this expression of those genes to actually work optimally and to avoid those diseases to happen. So those genes you talked about is certain genes like FTO and MC4R, which are genes basically. I'm a bit of a gluten, right? And I have these genes.
You've got the Labrador gene.
The Labrador genes, let's say that. And on top of that, I have other genes like inflammation related. So basically, if I start, if I'm not doing much sport and I'm someone who's going to eat a lot more than calorie than he should be doing. So I've sort of hacked this by swimming a lot back in the days, but I still do that. But now, obviously, because I've changed all this, because of my muscle memory and all these things that comes into consideration, I don't have this problem. However, if as a child I would have been a bit inactive, ate a lot of sugar after school, or sugary drink, my insulin, which is one of those genes related to that, will spike all the time. I could have been in serious complication, type 2 diabetes, obesity.
So why is it important that people in this room pay attention to what their genetic makeup is?
It is to regain control of your health. I mean, we passed the time now where we should be passive, because the healthcare system in place is amazing if you get run over by a car, and there's an amazing doctor that will save your life. But it's true. But and also if you have some infection, because it's all based on infection. But we passed this time where we actually cure those infections. Now the pandemic is lifestyle behavior diseases, and this needs to be learned, and it starts with us as proactive and educated individuals. And actually what I found is, and with GenSmart as well, as soon as you have this relationship with your own genetic, you understand, and a lot of things will stay connected. You will do things, oh wow, this is why I've got the death to buffet syndrome because of this gene.
I think what everyone's I think everyone's thinking in the room is like, I really hope I've got the lazy gene so I can get away at home and
yeah.
tell my partner, I swear, honey, this is not my fault. It's my genes.
Exactly. So yeah, no, I mean, you do need to have a look, and once you create this relationship with your biology, you cannot escape it, and you start to see the changes as well happening in terms of you avoid all those guesswork. You don't have to follow the latest trend and fad diets.
But that's such a problem, though, isn't it? It's like, I don't know if everybody feels it, but it feels like every day there's a new like fad, or there's a new, do the intermittent fasting, do the keto diet, the vegan, don't eat meat, don't eat fat. It's like, it's so overwhelming in terms of information for people. Like, if you could speak to everyone here in the room tonight around that problem of like information overload, and I just don't know what to do, what would you want to tell them?
Well, that again, we're all different, and certain diets will work for someone, but not works for someone else. And this is the whole problem of why people get results and others don't. But more importantly, some people can get even sick by doing certain type of diet. So veganism is not for everybody. I mean, plant-based diets, yes, will make you healthier, but only eating plant for certain people, the way they will absorb certain substances, fats that related to that, will actually be creating more inflammation and can lead to problems.
Yeah,
like over diets, right?
Yeah, that was so just a kind of a bit background information for everyone. I went and joined Thomas's academy, GenSmart Academy, like weekend, where basically they kind of take you through your genetic makeup and so forth. And that was like a fascinating thing that I really got away from it, was that like even if ethically you want to be vegan or plant-based, actually genetically speaking, you may not be predisposed as best as possible to process and get the nutrients from the vegetables. And also, anybody here is on the Bulletproof diet? Anybody heard of the Bulletproof diet? Yeah, cool. But that's another thing. Like some people shouldn't be on the Bulletproof diet because of their genes.
That's my case. So, so Bulletproof diet, for those who don't know, really, it's high fat and high protein. But the idea is also to have the Bulletproof coffee with a lot of high fat, which is actually really good in terms of energy and if you fast and all these things. So you can lose weight, but over time, there's certain genes that like ApoE genes, which is gene specific to cholesterol and how you transport the fat. I do have this variation that makes it difficult for my body to assimilate all those things. If I have a Bulletproof coffee, every day for 6 weeks, my cholesterol will be to the roof, my high blood pressure will be very high, and I could go into certain complications. So it's not for everyone. But this is like everything is. Yeah,
and we're coming to the close of the conversation. We'll get you back at the end with a Q&A with David and have that conversation, the three of us. But one of the things that if it comes down to like, okay, so let's say we all take the test, right? We will go to GenSmart. .me, is it?
Just
trying to plug it here. GenSmart. Okay, cool. Order the test kit. We get the test kit, and then we get the information, because that's something that can also, I've done that like twice, I think, over the last 5 years. So I get this information, and it feels almost overwhelming, right? So you basically get like, also just a FYI, like when you do certain tests, they ask you, do you want to find out about your predisposition of like cancerous genes and stuff? And so, and Alzheimer's onset and so forth. So it can be quite full on. But what would you want to tell the people who are thinking like, I've got my information now what? What do I do?
Yeah, so first thing I like to say is again, your genes are not your fate. And it's actually your lifestyle, your diet, and your environment that you create around you that will dictate the results. And what I would say is the important thing is not what is in black and white here, is what you do on a daily basis. So learning the mini habits, I would say, in the GenSmart platform, we call them the life hacks, that are personalized to you, that you can implement bit by bit, but it's one at a time, over time. We don't give everything in one go. For you to create a bit around that and create an environment that is favorable to optimize your health and longevity. But that's the important bit, is to see this as your own health journey, to be involved in that, because we're way too passive, and the statistics are quite alarming.
And you're going to become a dad soon?
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
Well, very good.
Thought I'd throw your script a bit there.
Unfortunately, I have a sleep deprivation gene.
Yeah. Oh my God, the best excuse ever. It's like, can't do the nights tonight, sweetie. My gene, right? I've got the predisposition. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll be managing that.
Yeah, that's awesome though. And also, I just want to say a big congratulations on your pitch that you did. And because I remember
Thank you.
back in the day when we spoke, public speaking wasn't something that you loved or looked forward to.
No. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. In fact, actually, Thomas, just for this event, I think was it the first time you put your face on the Insta stories, and when you were kind of promoting the event.
Yeah, actually, I did.
Yeah. So for the first time, so we're getting a round of applause for Thomas to put his face on Insta stories. Yeah.
Yeah. But I had my I definitely had my in Vienna. I had to do this in front of 500 people. It was quite a bit.
Yeah, and you got grilled.
Yeah,
Also, when you went to like the
I mean,
grills.
yeah, it was first, and the second event was sort of it's called not grilled but roasted, and it's quite similar. And basically, it's like if there's a comedian and there's like the investors, but they're trying to make fun of you. And but it was a very good experience actually.
Do you want to share the story? What was the first thing that that investor said? Oh God, not another.
Yeah, not another millennia business, and I was like, look at me, like if I'm millennia, obviously it was working, yeah. So I get confidence after that.
Yeah, if you think I'm millennia, obviously this is working. Thank you so much, Thomas. Please, round of applause for Thomas, please.
Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot, man. I'll get you back on stage. So next up is a guest that's very special actually because he has now beaten all world records when it comes down to the Unconventionalists podcast. This will be the third appearance of the one and only David Baker, who's been an absolute joy and pleasure to interview over the last 2 years, I think, when we started first. And here's a little story. When I gave my TEDx talk, did I mention I gave a TEDx talk? So before you start the show, you line up with all the different speakers, and you wait patiently, and they open up the doors. And everybody starts pouring in. And I'm sitting there kind of like pretending like I'm not nervous, totally nervous. And this girl stops me and she kind of goes, "Are you Mark Leruste?" And I'm like, "Yes." She's like, "Oh my God, I listened to your podcast and you're the reason why I'm here." I was like, what do you mean? It's like, "Yeah, I heard that you were coming to Cardiff to the TEDx, so I thought I'd come." I was like, "Oh, amazing." And I always love it when people do that. It never happens, but I love it when it does. And I told her, I said, "Oh, what's your favorite episode?" It's like, "Oh, that guy about the future of work." David, like David Baker. And that happens all the time. Like every time I meet someone who enjoys the show, they always go, "I could listen to David for hours on end." And David's got an incredible background. We won't have too much time to go into it. We've got 2 episodes where we really dive into it. But effectively, David was the launch managing editor of Wired UK magazine. Anybody reads Wired magazine or knows about Wired magazine? Yeah, it's a phenomenal magazine. Also spent over a decade as a journalist at the FT, Financial Times, and is also a regular broadcaster on BBC4, and we'll talk a bit more about one of the latest reports that he's done, and is also a lecturer at the School of Life. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Baker to the stage. Okay, so I have instructions today to make sure that I have the right points for David. So I will try and do my best. But David, so good to see you again.
Great to see you, Mark. Thanks very much for the invitation.
Yeah,
pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we're not on the couch today. We're not on the
no,
couch.
it was good. We also had headphones with microphones on,
Oh,
like 2
yes.
fighter pilots sitting on a couch last time. It was cool. We should bring those back, I think.
100%.
Easier.
Yeah. And thank you for making me look bad. You look beautiful in your
Well,
suit.
there was going to be a camera. I mean, are you kidding? But actually, a friend of mine's here, 2 friends of mine here, whose wedding was quite a long time ago. When was that? You guys, Simi and Henry, 2009, and I was wearing the same suit at their wedding. So unfortunately, that's the suit, you know.
No, and I'm really grateful that you accepted to come here tonight and share your wealth of wisdom and wisdom. But there's something every time I sit down with you. So I've got a little kind of backstory. Last time we spoke, I didn't sleep for like 2 days. And that's because we talked about the future of work and specifically about AI and robots. And but before we get into that, I know that there's something that's quite close to your heart. And a lot of people here as well, especially if you listen to the show, and that is to do work you love. And there's something about we all doing bullshit jobs. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. I mean, some people will know this phrase already because the guy who coined it has just produced a book called, I think, Bullshit Jobs. But he's a guy called David Graeber, who I met 2 or 3 years ago. He's an anthropology lecturer at the LSE, I think, and or King's. And he wrote a very good essay in a very, very tiny, very left-wing newspaper, which no one read, called On the Phenomenon of Bullshit Jobs. And he made a very good point, which really resonated with me. I mean, I need to lay my cards on the table. I think most of us work wrongly. And I think it's damaging our health, Thomas, and I think it's damaging our society. And I think we've got work wrong. And I think the fault of that is the factories in the Industrial Revolution. And his argument was that most of us most of the time are doing things which don't produce anything and which don't give us any satisfaction and which are not playing to our strengths. And he called these bullshit jobs. And so, so the example he gave was, for example, many of us who work in offices spend a lot of time maybe making a spreadsheet, which then becomes a PowerPoint presentation, and then we give that at a meeting, and those people at the meeting take some notes, which then becomes a report, which is then put into another PowerPoint and back into a spreadsheet. And all of this just goes round and round and round, and that's a very good description.
Anybody been through that? Anybody through that? Yeah.
There we are, you know, clerical work in action. And his example was that actually we're not very good at spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations and meetings, and they're boring, and we weren't employed to do that. We were employed because we had a particular skill or a particular insight. And his example of that is he said he himself is an anthropology lecturer, and he says in the essay, I'm good at teaching anthropology, but I spend most of my time filling in forms for grant applications or student numbers or whatever. And he said it's like employing a load of very good carpenters and asking them to cook fish. And he said there's a double negative here, because you end up with a load of awful fish, which no one really wants to eat, and the carpenters never get to express their craft. Yeah. And I think most of work, especially in our developed world, is like that. And I think we've got an opportunity to change that. And actually what you mentioned, technology and AI, I think could give us an opportunity to make the world better.
Yeah, and I remember there was a conversation that we had, and we kind of both saying, you know, we're in a very comfortable situation here. You know, we were both in North London at the time, you know, having a casual Tuesday conversation. And you know, for some people, it's a reality. Like, you know, not everybody... Actually, this is a question. Do you think everybody can afford to ask themselves the question, am I doing a bullshit job or not?
Well, I think everybody needs to ask themselves that question. Whether they can actually do anything about it is a different matter. And that's the problem, because there's a kind of nexus, isn't there, about work, money, and status or society, about what happens when we think about our work. I mean, it's very telling that even if we, in this room, I'm sure we think we're kind of cool people, very quickly we end up telling someone about the work we do. It's part of our identity. It's part of how we feel and we might find a purpose in life. It's part of how we get things like creativity and teamwork. And so when we meet strangers, for example, we tend to go, you know, what do you do? You know, and that's we start with that
question.
Point.
That's always the first, like, what do you do?
So it's interesting to ask why it is the first question. You know, so on the one hand, it's kind of an easy question. There's an easy answer. But there's a kind of limitation about the question, obviously, because it puts that person, or puts us, in a box, which is something like, the way I earn my money is the primary part of my identity. And I think we've kind of gone wrong there, actually. I mean, now some people, and don't get me wrong, there are probably plenty of people here who feel that, love that question. They love their job. It gives them great pleasure. It gives them great joy. I mean, Thomas and I had a conversation about that just then, and he loves his job and is delighted to be known for his work. Other people maybe less so. And the trouble with that question is it kind of blinds us to other aspects of the person. It'd be quite nice to hear whether the person, for example, is empathic or a good listener or kind or curious, these words. And this is something I've been thinking about quite a lot recently, because these words kind of get downgraded in
it's
the
too
world
soft, or it's not important.
Well, we use the word soft, you see. So actually, at the School of Life, we've been looking at this a lot recently, because we've been looking at this idea of emotional intelligence. Now, I'll put my cards on the table. I don't really like this phrase, because it's kind of EQ, IQ, that kind of feel. But it's playing a bit into the paradigm. But basically, emotional intelligence are things that we usually call something like soft skills. And if you think about the world of work, that when money is rolling in, when there's a boom going on rather than a recession, companies do loads of training in these things like, you know, listening, ideas generation.
We've been told that we need to create some culture.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly that. You know, let's have a compassion juggling workshop or something like that. You know, and as soon as the money goes, those courses completely disappear. And the courses that get preserved are things like strategic management or spreadsheets. You know, how to do a PowerPoint. Budgeting, project planning, you know, the Gantt chart and everything like that. And in a way, we've ended up in a culture where those things, project planning, Gantt chart, whatever, is seen as hard skills, and we call the others soft skills. And I think, I really do think this, I think there's quite a lot of misogyny going on here, actually, because I think the first ones are associated with men, and the other is associated with women. And in the corporate world, I'm speaking in the Anglo-Saxon corporate world, and I think probably in the European corporate world as well, those skills have a hierarchy about them. That, you know, strategic thinking is up here, listening is down there, and I think men are up here and women are down there, and that's a kind of a cultural attitude that corporate life has ingrained in it and needs to be challenged. Please.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, because it's the and I love what you're saying, and there's a point I just wanted to come back to just before we go deeper into that, and that is, if asking what do you do is perhaps not the best question we should ask. What would be the question that you would like all of us to ask first?
Well, I don't think there is a particular question, but I need to tell a story about this because I made a radio program, which is for the World Service, about this question: what do we do? And by chance, because it was a coincidence that I taught at the School of Life, we met two people who had met at a class at the School of Life. For anybody who doesn't know, the School of Life is a place in central London, Russell Square, which the philosopher Alain de Botton set up to help us think about emotional intelligence, about these ideas. And we had a class at the School of Life a long time ago called How to Have a Good Conversation. And I've taught it a couple of times, and they, by chance, went on this class. And one of the instructions was, you're not allowed to ask anyone you meet at this class, what do you do? So you've got to stop that.
So no one talked.
So you had to think of a different way of speaking to them. Now, on the program, we had two people who met that night, a man and a woman who met that night. And afterwards, they went out and had a drink with each other, and then they started dating.
Oh, wow.
And for 8 months, they didn't ask each other, what do you do? And when we met them, it was 4 years in. And I have to say, Mark, I've never seen two people so in love in my life. They came into the BBC studio.
You've never seen me and my girlfriend?
Well, no, we haven't. I'm sorry. It's like, Is she here? Well, we're going to have to see. Anyway,
I know what she does, though. I know what she does.
They came into the studio at the BBC holding hands. They've been together for 4 years. They were so connected with each other, so respectful and so into each other. And they told us a story about those 8 months were kind of wonderful because they kept on having to ask what you've just asked. What is the question I can ask? Rather than saying, what do you do? And so they found out, as they said, so much profundity about each other. I mean, it sounds extraordinary, but what are you worried about? What do you fear? What are you excited about in the future? What are you curious about at the moment? I think the short answer to your question is hairdressers get it right, because they are already always having these conversations, and they usually go something like, have you been on holiday recently? Because that's a great question, because then you can say, oh God, yeah, I was in Ibiza, or no, but I'm hoping to go to X, and that gets into, because the next question is like, why Ibiza? And then you go, oh well, I feel like maybe going raving, and then sure. Do you usually rave? And go, well, I used to, and now you've got an interesting conversation about their life, well away from their job.
So there's a question I've asked you pretty much every interview, and you kind of let's dive into that. And it is, you asked about what are you excited about, and there's this question I always ask you is like, are you excited or are you fearful about the future, especially when we talk about AI and robots coming?
Okay, well, I'm very excited about the future, even with work and AI. I know there's a lot of dread coming up. I think there'll be a lot of problems. I think there'll be a lot of challenges to us because it'll shake us out of something that we're used to, which is we go to university, we have a career which sort of goes up in steps, and we get promoted, and then at 60, 65 or whatever, we pop out the other end, with a cuckoo clock and a party, and off we go, and then whatever retirement is. And I think AI and robotics especially are going to, I hate using the word, I was going to try and not use it, disrupt.
You said it, David.
I said it, and it's actually a word we banned now in Wired. We've used it so often, But I think AI and robotics is going to upset that model in a very big way, and I think it's going to be in a good way. So I'm quite excited. Now, the downside of this will be we'll all have to think a lot harder about what we do for work, and about what work means for us. And you and I, when we first met, we had this conversation that, and I'll say this again because we talked about the lazy gene. I actually think the word lazy is a very loaded word. I don't think, I'll say it about myself. I don't much like work. And I actually think loads of us work too much. Yeah. And I don't mean necessarily the hours, although I absolutely think almost everyone who has maybe an office job in London is working too long hours.
I started reading Willing Slave, by the way.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, if I really recommend it. Anybody who's interested in what David's talking about right now, there's a great book called Willing Slave by... Yeah, there you go. David, come on! Yes,
Madeline Bunting.
That's
Madeline
it.
Bunting.
There you go. But it talks about that. It talks about the generation overworked and how we put in too much. So sorry,
because there's a cultural thing. So if you imagine when we get a job, we sign on a contract, and it says usually something like 9:30 to 5:30, an hour for lunch, 5 days a week, and I can't do the sum, but that's about 45 or something days. And if you actually followed those hours rigorously, then we get that really English sarcastic thing, like, you know, you're going home at 5:30, like, half day then, you know, that way people sneer at the office. So what we end up with people then creating work for themselves just to stay a bit later, stay a bit later. And then you look at certain sectors, law is one of them in the city, where it's a coolness to still be there at 11 o'clock at night. Now, I think it's completely uncool if your job is keeping you in the office till 11 o'clock at night. Because I think what's happened is you're probably not working efficiently, or you've taken on too much work and you need to bounce that back, or you haven't got the rest of what's happened to the rest of your life.
Yeah,
you know, what's happened to your love life? What's happened to
the relationships?
What's happened to having fun? What's happened to exploring the world, being curious about the world, to discovering new things? So I think, I know you're desperate to butt in, but I'm not going to let you.
So much. Every time I sit down, I was like, oh my God, wait.
But I think, and Thomas and I had a quick chat about this, I think we should go in the opposite direction. I think we should say, can I reduce the number of hours I work in the week? And I think to about 3 days. Now, I'll say this, I've tried to do this myself, and I kind of average about 3 days. And obviously that implies I'm going to earn less money. That's absolutely the truth of this matter. And therefore, you have to say, well, I'm going to spend less money. And actually, we all know, however skint we feel, we can definitely exist on less money. If all of us in this room...
But the more you earn and the more you spend, and I mean, I've seen this when I used to have a job, and before fun employment kicked in. But yeah, and every time you had a promotion, you earn more, and suddenly you're just spending more, and it's like it just never ends. And I've got friends who are making lots more money than me, and they're complaining. They're like, they're on 6 figures, and they're all complaining about how they're still not making enough.
Yeah, I have a friend who came back from New York, I think it was last year, and he used to work in New York, and he said he met a friend of his there who described himself as poor. He literally used the word, I am poor. This man has a brownstone in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and one of those beach houses, you know, on Long Island or wherever it is out there, you know. But he hangs out with people that have a brownstone on the Upper East Side, a beach house, and a yacht. So for him, he's at the bottom of that pile. He's comparing himself with them, so he's poor. If again, to go back to School of Life, we have a class about sort of the psychology of money, or we used to anyway. And one of the little exercises was to ask the room, where on a scale of 0 to 10 in the distribution of incomes in the United Kingdom is your income? Almost ever. It's worth just imagining this in your minds now. So, I'm saying 0 is the bottom, 10 is the top of incomes in the United Kingdom. Where is your income? And so almost everyone...
Let's pause for a second.
Okay.
Everybody here, right, have a think about it, right? 0 to 10, where do you think you stand on the scale of income? Is that
your household income?
Yeah, cool. What's the next exercise?
Okay, so then everyone gives themselves about 7-ish, 7.5, 8, something like that. You know, we're middle class people at the School of Life. You know, it's that kind of demographic, if you like. The truth is, almost everyone in the room is at about 9.8.
I would actually challenge. I would imagine more people being 5, 6.
Okay, well let's see. Now we've given the numbers away.
Yeah.
So
4 below. Yeah, 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Yeah.
It's kind of spoiled the exercise, so I gave the answers away before, didn't I? Yeah. But the thing is, we don't... I'm trying to make a kind of moral point, I guess, actually, that we, even though all of us, and I have absolute compassion for people who feel short of money, if we lost our jobs tomorrow, we would still survive. You know, we might have to live in a smaller house, or we might have to live in a different town, or we might not be able to buy this or eat this, but we would still live. And I think that's kind of where we might approach this problem about working too long hours. Because, first of all, there may be people who actually are totally happy with the hours they're working. And I would say, great, good on you. But I suspect we're more interested in people who say, I'm really unhappy with the hours I'm working. I seem to be exhausted when I come home from the office or work at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. And then you need to say to them, okay, well, what does work give you? And can you find that somewhere else in non-work life?
Can I just speak to that for a second? Because it's really interesting, right? So there's this thing also that I think you're speaking to and that we're kind of going around, and that's sometimes it's like a cultural thing, right? So like you talk about people, and we had a conversation with my partner and someone else the other day who was basically telling us about how her boss had landed this huge project that she had to do. And she couldn't physically figure out how she could fit that in with amongst all her different activities that she had to do, right? and she was a trained doctor, and I think she's a psychologist and so forth. And we kept on telling her, about, you've got to go back and tell your boss that this is not okay, and if they want you to do this, then you're going to have to sacrifice something else. And she was so adamant that that is impossible. You cannot say that. I will be banished from my entire medical community. You know, I will never get a job again. I mean, it's so visceral that I almost want to ask you, like, in those kind of companies with such an ingrained culture around the more you put in, i.e. the more you look like you're putting in, the more rewarded you will be, the more appreciated you will be. What would you like to tell them, if anything, and maybe a tip about what they could do?
Okay, well, first of all, I actually don't believe the company is really like that. I think much of that company culture is in our imagination as workers in those kind of companies. There are companies like that. I mean, there's a very good novel called The Circle by David Eggers, which is basically about Google. And I imagine it might be a bit like that at Google, but I've not got experience of Google. But I actually think quite a lot of the time it's very interesting that she said, oh, it's impossible. I cannot say that to him. Obviously, it's not impossible. You can say that. Now, she might lose her job. As you say, she might be, what was it, thrown out by the whole medical community or something.
Such a visceral reaction.
But your key word here is visceral. And this is why I think it's time for us to look at these skills where we started with this idea of soft skills, to use the cultural word, these emotional skills we have. Because when we say something is visceral, we're not really rationalizing the chances of this or that happening. We have a feeling which is informing our decision. In her case, her decision not to tell the boss she couldn't do this, and presumably with the result that she's now working all night and getting exhausted. You know, so what you might say is that she needs to build a certain skill, which would be something to do with confidence, resilience, communication. Not catastrophizing. You know, one of the big things we do in our mind when we think about, oh my goodness, I'm going to go and talk to my boss, is we can imagine absolutely the worst outcome, which seems to be what she did. So actually, the skills might not be anything to do with her boss or her or the hours at work. It might be, could this person develop a greater skill in confident assertiveness and less catastrophizing, for example. Now, what might happen then is her visceral feeling might change, and she might be a lot more confident about going to the boss and saying, you know, I know you've given me this project, and I'm pleased you've given me that vote of confidence, but to be honest, looking at my workload at the moment, I'm not going to be able to do it, and I'm not going to be able to do it well. And actually, I'd rather you gave it to someone else. Now, that's a conversation that all of us now are probably feeling crunched stomachs and anxious. But the truth is, we know when we do have that conversation with a boss, suddenly we're treated with new respect. Now, some awful bosses and awful companies will sack you, and I want to say, good for you. You've got out of that awful boss and that awful company. There are other companies and there are other bosses. And as we'll look at, there's also self-employment. But I think that many people might find that when they have actually spoken to someone in that way, and it's beyond work as well, it may be in a relationship, for example, or with an annoying neighbor, that actually they're then treated with greater respect and they're heard. And I think that's what I mean about developing emotional intelligence in work.
I love what you're talking about. And what you're talking about, there's this concept around embracing difficult conversations and celebrating conflict. And actually my partner, and I'm going to tell you, living with a partner who loves embracing difficult conversations and celebrates conflict is great. But she's actually running a workshop at The Guardian, I think, in a couple of months. But it's fascinating because for her, it's like the best thing ever. Like, she goes into teams and she wants to get teams to kind of get all the gunk out, all the real stuff, and people are just terrified at the idea of conflict. If you could give a point of advice, like anybody here in the room is thinking, apart from going off obviously to Judy Lights' workshop later on, but if you could give a point of advice to someone thinking, wow, you're right, David, I really need to have that conversation, but I don't know where to start, what would be like one tip you could give them?
It's interesting. I always, when someone says, can you give advice, I always go, no. You know, it's like, well, partly because, rather like Thomas's company, we're all different, and we need to come authentically from inside us. So the first, my feeling is that the first route to good emotional intelligence is greater self-knowledge. So probably the starting point is actually ignore that conversation for the moment, start looking inside ourselves more about who am I, what's important to me, what's less important to me, what are my fears, what are my excitements, what are my joys. And one of the ways, and many people do this really well, is actually start the day with about 10 minutes of, it's often called something like journaling or something, but just write anything for 5 minutes first thing in the morning, or 10 minutes first thing in the morning. And what starts happening there, it doesn't really matter what you write, you can even just put it in the bin afterwards. What happens is that if you're just sort of writing and writing and writing and writing, maybe even just write with your eyes closed or something, your what we might call our inner self or our unconscious starts talking to us, and we start realizing, actually, it's important to me, maybe in your friend's case, for the boss to like me. I daren't go and see him and say I can't do this work because I like the fact that he likes me, or whatever it might be. And 100%. So we discover things about ourselves. So I'd say step one is self-awareness. And obviously...
Can I speak to that just for a second? I just want to share. What I love what you're saying is there's this book called The Artist Way. Yeah. And it's basically, the idea is every morning you write 3 pages uninterrupted. And if you've been listening to the show, then you know that this is something I've been doing lately. And what you say is so true. After about 40 days of just kind of regularly journaling, I started realizing that actually the reason why I was posting on social media and craving likes and all this stuff is because there was a part of me that I wasn't accepting. There was a part of me that I wasn't okay with. And so I was seeking that validation externally. And this sounds like deep shit. But it basically, it was like this, the higher self, whatever you call it, but it was this amazing kind of unlocking the unconscious that brought clarity that I could only get through journaling. So I love that you actually spoke to that.
I mean, it is deep shit, but it's also deep gold, if you like. You know, we're discovering about ourselves the things that are important to us. Now, you know, whatever our religious feelings are, we're probably here for one bash at life. Yeah. You know, right now, the clock is ticking through our lives, as we know. You know, the future, who knows when the future comes, and I mean this in terms of our death. You know, I mean, the Stoic philosophers got this straight away. You know, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, they said often, you could walk out this talk tonight and, God forbid, be knocked over by the 171 bus, you know, at Wood Lane or whatever like that. Now, if that happened and you were lying on the, well, let's make it personal. If that happened to me and I was lying, or us, we were lying on the grass, lying on the road, and we had the last ticking away seconds of our life, would we be able to answer the question like, am I living the life I want to be living? Have I lived the life I want to live? Or have I lived the life that other people wanted me to live? I mean, this is very Socrates. This is, you know, Socrates asked us to always analyze our lives and say, what's important for me? What do I really want to be doing? Because, and the Stoics pointed this out, that bus might come. For them, it was a roof slate, but you know that bus might come at any point. But but the same thing. You know, a chariot, I guess. You know, but they pointed out, you know, that actually, especially now in our modern world, and you know, good for Thomas for helping protect us from this. Death is very invisible to us. We're quite stunned. You know, it happened with Anthony Bourdain recently that somebody dies, but we're all going to die, and it's grim to say, but we might actually die much sooner than we think we are. So really, if we've spent the whole of our life writing spreadsheets and doing PowerPoints and staying at 11 o'clock doing projects that we didn't feel we could do, is that really the good life? And in fact, somebody at a wedding once, I think we talked about this before, someone at a wedding once in Paris once said, he gave us a little sort of brain teaser. He said, I want you to imagine you're dead and it's your funeral. And someone could say 10 words about you in the eulogy over your coffin. You're lying there. Somebody else says these 10 words. What would you like those 10 words to be? And I'm pretty sure no one would go, she took on extra projects from her boss and worked late at 11 o'clock and did some great spreadsheets or something, you know. And actually, that's what I mean by emotional intelligence, actually, that when we look at the future of work, which actually will give us much more opportunity to think in these ways, I really think that much technology will take away the drudgery of work. It'll be doing the spreadsheets that we won't. We have an opportunity to go, you know what would I like somebody to say about my life? And you might say, what would I like someone to say about my work life? And it might be, they worked less time, but all the work they did gave them joy, or something like that.
Do you fear death?
No, I don't fear it. I mean, I think it's going to be awful because I rather like life, and I'm quite excited, you know, to be here, to be traveling, to meet new people. I'm very lucky in the job I do, which is as a journalist, I meet thrilling people all the time. But it's silly to fear death because it's a total certainty. Why worry about something that's a certainty? I hope it's not for a long time. But I will say sincerely that if, God forbid, the 171 or whatever, I'm not a West London person, I don't know what the bus routes are here, but whatever bus it is knocks me down, you know what, I would like to feel those last few seconds won't be with regret.
Yeah. No, I love that, and we're coming to the end of this interview. Every time I sit down with David, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I had 2 more hours. And it's always the same thing. There's this concept of the 100-year life.
Yes, yes.
That we were talking about, that you wanted to kind of bring, and I just want to make sure we had a bit of time for that.
Sure. So some people will know this book. There's a book by a woman called Linda Grant called The 100-Year Life, and she's a proper person. She's not one of these gooky writers. She's a professor of management strategy, I think, at London Business School, and she's pointing out, and I think Thomas probably would back us up here, that actually there's many people alive today who will live to the age of 100. And in quite good health. And as a result, your career might take you into your 80s. And that's not unusual. That's not impossible now, but actually that's a rare thing now. We usually, certainly when I started work, there was this idea that you did a whole chunk of your life being educated, then a great chunk of your life from about 21 to 65 or whatever, working, and then 65 to X, in retirement. And we had these ideas, this 3-phase life. And she says something very important here, that she says, actually, if we're going to work into our 80s and live to our 100s, we're going to have to abandon this 3-phase program. That instead, work is going to have to change. That it's nothing we learn in that first phase is going to take us through whatever it is, 60 years of work. And instead,
so
we might.
100 is the new 60.
Well, 100. Yeah, 100. Well, 100 is the new 60 and a bit, or something like that. But actually, what we might have to do is keep on changing the work we do, and keep on going back into training, and keep on going back into education. And that, for me, is the real opportunity here, actually, because I don't believe that it's right for us to do a single thing from the age of 21 to the age of 65. I do believe that most of us in this room, and I can't speak for anyone's finances, but I'm guessing this, will have to carry on working quite a long time after 65. I've just finished a BBC program about this, and almost everyone we interviewed is now in their 70s, setting up entrepreneurial projects and things like that. And so long as we keep our health, that's probably will be the thing that keeps us sane or keeps us interested in the world. But we're not going to be doing the same thing as we did when we were 22. So education is going to have to change.
Yeah.
And to go back to this thing, which is always a spectrum of the conversation, money is going to have to change. We're going to have to find a way of living more frugally. I think we've said goodbye to this idea that our money is going to constantly be on an upward plane till we die. It'll zigzag crazily.
Yeah, I read somewhere that the millennials, us millennials again, are going to be one of the first generations to earn less than our parents' generation.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I think perhaps even more acutely, the first generation, and I'm going to include myself in the millennials. I mean, all of us working right now are kind of the first generation to have to expect big drops in our income during our work life. So whereas my father and certainly my grandfather would have expected a life which started lowish and just slowly went up and up and up and up and up to retirement, and then the challenge was, how do you keep funding yourself through retirement? Nowadays, all of us in this room will have some year ahead of us where we will earn less than the previous year. The graph will go up, down, up, down. And we need to develop a kind of resilience and a psychology which will make that not feel like a total disaster.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to give a round of applause for David. Yeah, I mean, every time I say this to David, it's like I could talk to you for hours, and I know you will be back on the show, David. You just can't run away. So I'm going to invite Thomas to come back on stage, and you two can take these chairs. This is the moment of like the improvisation shuffle. All right. So we're going to go to a Q&A in a second, but I just thought I'd get two people. I feel like, I don't know, I'm nervous, like the future of health and the future of work. And yeah.
We just need the future of love.
Yeah, there you go, I'm here.
There we are.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, no, it's fascinating both to spend some time with you. And I think there's got to be a bridge, right, between the future of health and the future of work and how it's intertwined. And I think more and more companies now especially are looking at the well-being of their employees, and this kind of like this idea of wellness, is kind of coming into the company. And a question to you actually, Thomas, is around AI, artificial intelligence. Because I remember that when you went for the pitching competition, that was a big aspect that you kind of went into to talk about the future of health, and especially in the genetic world. Tell us a bit more about that.
So in terms of artificial intelligence, it's a very broad subject, right? But for me, the artificial intelligence is about creating, something a lot more clever than us, that gathers all the data and makes more sense and can make decision. This is the crazy thing about it. It can make decision for us better than we would do. And if you can have this in sort of the background when it comes to your health, and we go a bit futuristic, let's go for it. It's the future, but let's imagine like Google now and Amazon, they're going all those connected voice, vocal AI. Everything could happen in your house. For example, your personalized supplementation strategy of the day is preaching when you're still sleeping,
because I basically so I think what Thomas is speaking to is what you're into is optimizing the health and lifestyle, right? So one of the things you could do, for example, is there's some wearable technology now that you can wear that monitors your sleep, your heart rate, your deep sleep, and so that you wake up, you can have that on the app, and it could actually just print out saying, okay, you've slept this amount of hours, then you're going to need a nap.
But also even more about your biometrics, so all the your heart rate, your everything that can be monitored, your vitamins, your minerals, what do you need at this special moment, at this special time. And even Google now could look into your agenda. Oh, you've got a party tonight, it's Mark's birthday, maybe you should have this sort of supplement and this sort, because this will help your detoxification pathways to work better. So then you can drink a bit more.
I just had a vision of having an argument with my partner, like, it looks like you need your vitamins. It's like, you need
but what I mean is everything, there's different sides. You can have the Terminator scenario, and this is the whole thing that we fear, right? But at the same time, I see AI anyway to improve our lives and give us more time to to come back to what you were saying, to do the things we love, and spend more time with the people we love. And I think that's the important bit, and how we should actually focus on developing all this artificial intelligence and.
Yeah, and David, just talking about that, why are people afraid of AI? Why are people afraid of artificial intelligence?
Well, I'm going to tell you why I'm afraid of that. Actually, So I'm a bit concerned. I actually get what you're up to, and good for you. And I totally get this idea
This
of.
is it. David's out now. Sorry, Thomas. This is
when we were at Wired, we talked about this quite a lot. Actually, this idea, there were Fitbits invented, and there was this idea of the kind of constant monitoring of our numbers. My worry, and I think this is great. I'm absolutely sure that good health will come from your project, and good for that. I think there are two unanswered questions which the AI world doesn't really allow us to even contemplate. One is, why do we want to live longer and healthier? I know that sounds like such a blindingly obvious question, and it may well be, because X, Y, Z, duh. But actually, I suspect we actually haven't even thought that one through yet. That I've been talking today about people in retirement, who are now looking, to live to 100 or whatever. I say that, do we really want to live to 100? Or I mean, I know there's meant to be medical cutoff points.
Actually, because we were thinking about this. We have a brainstorm with our developers, and we it's all about choice, right? So it's who you are, who you want to be, and what do you want to do, and it's your life after all, and you still have the free will of choice, and has to be a very important element of it. So you can actually have, within those things, you can actually choose if you want to do that or not, and that's very important. It's just like sharing your data with the doctors. You'll be able to do that, but if you don't want to, then don't do it. It's very important to have this aspect as well.
I want to speak to that for a second, because a few years ago I did a kind of a panel for Adobe, and one of the invitees was Dr. Turnbull, and she's kind of a genomic specialist. And one of the things she was talking about was the potential threat, I guess, of data protection or not, is that some insurance might put a premium on the fact that they can have access to your genetic details, and like, oh, you're predisposed to a certain disease or chronic disease or cancer, something like that. And I'm just curious to hear about, like, what do you think people can do or to kind of protect themselves?
It's exactly this point, actually. If you could opt in, just like you opt in to connect to the Wi-Fi or not, opting to share this data, it's your data, and you should get the ownership of it. And I think we're going with GDPR, and I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic. I have difficulty to say it.
GDPR, it's a mouthful.
GDPR, but it's a good example that's coming toward. We're going towards that direction. Is you have to have the choice. Yeah, the choice is yours. Like, if you don't want to share, then fine, and we should agree on a level. But then if you are proactive towards your health, and if you want to show it that you're proactive towards your health, maybe you should get a discount and be rewarded this way for a premium, life insurance, which is cheaper because actually you're proving being proactive towards your health.
There are a few companies who do that, and I'll get this out. But David, I know that you are particularly are very protective around data, and you were the first person that introduced the concept to me that we should be selling our information to companies and not the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, and this has become quite common now, actually, this idea, and certainly this year there's going to be quite a lot of little data bank accounts set up. I think little hats, I think they're called, but they, certainly in Britain and in mainland Europe, there are some people setting up these ideas that when we invented the internet, we weren't quite sure how anyone was going to pay for it. Partly, I think, because of a hideous pun. There was a kind of Thomas is way too young to remember this, but but back in the early days of the World Wide Web, especially, there was this kind of mantra which says information should be free. And because it was in English, we had this sort of pun about free, as in free to move around, which was kind of the initial intention of that. But very quickly, it became free, i.e., I don't want to pay for it. And what happened was when the big corporations arose, or simply just corporations offering services, email, no one wanted to pay for those. And so instead, they said, well, actually, it's generating quite a lot of data. We'll sell those data to advertisers to meet those customers. And we know the result now, 30 years down the line. We've ended up with actually, in many senses, very unfree information, sort of about 4 or 5 big companies, in effect, having our data. Yeah. But I'm interested in this because actually the scandals, especially recently about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, have led us to a place where we actually are saying, you know what, this data that I generate is valuable. But the trouble is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, it's not actually very valuable. My own data all by itself is not very valuable at all. It's only valuable when there are 1 billion of me sharing our data and we're finding correlations between us. So the problem, to come back to you with my cynicism, is the problem.
I'm trying to get you off the hook, Thomas.
The problem with saying it's a bit like Wi-Fi, you can opt in or you can opt out, is actually we don't really want people to opt out at all. We want everybody to be contributing their data, because then we'll treat healthcare, we'll solve problems in healthcare much better.
But then, it's this choice. But what we're trying to achieve, again, with GenSmart is to create this digital representation of your health, right? But then you get the data and you own those data. Then you can exchange them if you want with research. Not only for, a pharmaceutical, let's say, will pay for your whole genome and they will gather 100 of them, but they will pay for that. So you can be paid again.
Just a second, just to speak of that. So what Thomas is speaking to there is that at the moment, if you go through and get your genetic makeup made, basically the business model is that people don't really care about doing that. It's more about they sell your data to big pharma. Okay, so it's aggregated information. Some of the companies. And so what you're trying to talk about is you reverse that on its head and actually go own your data and then decide when you want to sell it to certain projects. Let's say you have a notification that says, hey, I don't know, Pfizer is trying to do a research thing. Do you want to opt in your information and get like $10? I don't know, whatever it is. Is that what you're talking about?
How much would it be?
Well, it depends of the research.
What's on offer here, Thomas?
This is where David goes, look up
exactly.
data.
I'll
change my mind about this.
But it could solve maybe the problem of, you don't have to work for a day, maybe, who knows. But if you do that on a regular basis. But the idea as well is like if you opt in again, if you have this certain gene variant and they are looking for this gene variant, you can have this platform where you all anonymously, you've got created this peered platform where you have in one side us, okay, and the big pharma and the research, and you have this ApoE gene. They are looking for people who have this gene's variation. You would like to do that, and you'll be paid for it. That could be a good model. I mean, it's and I think it's fair because it's your information, it's your data. Right now, the way it's being done is like we tell you about your ancestry. I mean, a lot of companies do that. Like, I'm 3% Inuit, great. But then the reality is at the back, your data are being sold.
So we're going to open up to the floor. You've been so super patient. So we have the fabulous Cloud, who's got a microphone. So just if I can ask to wait till you get the microphone to actually ask your question so that everyone can hear it. And that's it. So I think, Heather had a question. Well, you get one question, Heather. You get one
I'll
question.
start with one. Thank you very much. That's been incredible. My question is, why is it in pharmaceuticals' interest to help us get well?
Well, because they have changed the model, actually, I think. There's a rise of people who are being proactive towards their health. And I think if they keep going on a treating aspect of, producing drugs and else. But there's also things like pharmacogenomics, which is basically tells you what drugs is the best for you. And those are of their interest, obviously, because even right now, like in the UK, more than 10,000 people die every year of misuse of, drugs adverse reaction. That could totally be preventable, and we're already doing that within the app. Telling you like, what works for you and what don't work and what can kill you. So you want to know about those things before being prescribed some drugs.
Cool, thanks. Dave, you want anything you want to add on that?
No.
No, cool. Next question, yeah, at the back.
Hi.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot, but do you mind just saying your name so we can then say thank you for the question?
Oh yeah, I'm Sam.
Hi, Sam.
So you, David, you evoked Chef Bourdain and his death, his recent death, doing ostensibly what he loved, which was going around and looking at food from all over the world. Now, a lot of chefs, I'm a chef, I'm going to predicate this, a lot of chefs start when they're 15. I didn't, but they rise up through the ranks, and eventually, when they can, they do not do as many hours as the bottom people do. Now, Chef Bourdain pretty much reached that, and he had left the kitchen. He was doing other stuff, but a lot of chefs do die in the kitchen, as in they are still cooking when they die at like 70, 80. But there are enormous health problems associated with being a chef, and Chef Bourdain was a good example of that. So where do you, how do you rectify the difference between what you say you want people to do is, work shorter hours, work 3 days a week, I think it was, when essentially if you get to the top of your field, which these people are striving to do, then you naturally leave the 7-day
So
or
Sam, I'm just
6-day
going to jump
work.
in this for a second just to kind of bottom line the question. So I think what I'm hearing you saying is, so I get that what you're saying, David, is about the 3-day week would be the ideal outcome for us, and yet what we're seeing is that, for example, in Chef Bourdain's case, who had reached that level and yet had mental health issues and took his life, and then how do you consolidate those two gaps? Is that
It wasn't so much the mental health issues.
Okay.
It was that if you rise to a level of proficiency or excellence in any profession, then there is an element of naturally shedding the 7-day week or the 5-day week or whatever you do, and the conventional work week is just a byproduct of being less than superlative.
So what's the question? I'm a bit confused about what the question is.
It's that you want everyone to be working this 3-day week, but everyone is not superlative. So how do you sort of close that gap?
Okay, so first of all, I need to clarify. I obviously wasn't clear. I don't want everyone to be working 3-day week. I want people to be working 3-day week if they want to work a 3-day week. In other words, I think I want the option there. And there are plenty of people who would like to work a 90-hour week. And for example, you see this often with musicians who, but when you add in the practice and the touring and the performance, they get to a certain level, through Malcolm Gladwell's famous 10,000 hours or whatever, they get to that level of skill. Now, don't get me wrong, if somebody wants to work all the time, that's their business. What I'm asking is a bit like Socrates would ask us, am I working the work I want to be working, or the work that somehow the culture expects me to work? So when it comes to things like, star chefs, or indeed star musicians or actors or whatever, we're used to this idea that there's a sort of level of grind, lots of long hours, and then gradually you get better and better and better, and eventually you have an easier life. And in fact, that's actually the general metaphor of work that we have. We tend to think that more junior people in the office should do more than those kind of executives who seem to float around in first-class flights and, just in the limo all the time. But I think actually that's not necessarily, you use the word naturally, and I would say nothing is natural. I would say that actually we've invented this way of working. It seems to be the cultural way we approve of work. And actually we as individuals, especially now, you know, we're in a rich country, in a rich situation, in a very comfortable position. You know, even if we lose everything, we'll still have the National Health Service in this country. You know, we're very supported. We could as individuals say, you know what, I want to challenge that cultural narrative just in my life. Everyone else can get on with their long hours and slaving away in the kitchen or whatever it might be. I want to do something different. I never want to work to this level. Now, I might say, I never therefore want to be, you had a very good word, superlative. But that's fine. The way I'm going to judge how I'm successful in work is going to be on my own terms. And this is where I come back to emotional intelligence. Actually, that's the conversation we have with ourselves and say, what does it mean to me to be successful in work? Do I even know the answer to that question? Now, it may well be, what it means is I'm going to be a three Michelin star chef and have a TV series and whatever. Then there's your route. You know, lots of hard work in the kitchen and many, many hours in the week. But it might mean something else. And that's our job to find out about that.
What I love about what you just said, David, is this idea that I think just asking yourself the question of like, what does success mean to me? Like, what does that mean to me? And sometimes that can be like such a mind blow for a lot of people who've never actually stopped and asked themselves a question. I used to, and a few people in this room tonight met through a program where I used to coach and lead the kind of transition away from a job that they weren't happy with to try and figuring out fulfilling work. And just asking that question was a big game changer. Yeah. Did you have anything you want to add? Or no?
I mean, we were talking about, you know, this personal aspect, and it is the same when it comes to health or anything. Is what is your perspective of you being healthy? It can be just having more energy. It can be just you know. So it needs to be defined on that. And what we do is we have the representation of the you know, certain magazine, and this is the picture of health. But health is also individualized now, but it needs to be different for a person to another, as we all have our conception. So yeah, I think
but it's interesting you bring
like
health.
work.
It's interesting you bring up health, because actually health brings up really interesting emotive moments. You know, somebody says, for example, I have an infectious disease, but I don't want treatment. This is kind of a very bold thing that they might say. I mean, infectious is actually a bad example because you might not want them to infect someone else. But say, I have an infectious disease, I don't want treatment, but I promise I won't infect anyone else. I will just decay and die. Yeah. We kind of would feel, I think we'd feel very uncomfortable about that person's decision. We try to counsel them, we try to intervene.
Why would you want to do that?
Especially for the family, yes.
Yeah.
And so it comes to this philosophical idea about who's in charge of our body. And I guess that my, you know, silly discomfort with your project earlier was actually, I'm a bit worried that AI is in charge of my body if I'm uploading all this data and then following the instructions onto my app.
That's the idea.
Well, there's so just also to speak to the fact that I want to speak to something that sometimes it can be very easy to say, you know, figure out what your success is and go and do it. But what can happen often is that you realize that, wow, I'm in an environment that's not going to care or foster this change that I'm seeking. And that can be hard. So I just want to kind of put that in the room, because sometimes you can realize, oh, I don't belong in this culture and nothing I will do able to change this culture. Then I might need to move on. So whether that's in a kitchen or that's in a boardroom, it applies the same. So just want to give yourself a little bit of that patience. So we'll just get a couple more. Yeah, we've got a question in the middle. Don't mind passing the mic, that'd be great. Just remember to say your name first.
Yeah, Dima. I guess my question is a little bit about speed, because I think there's
the drug or the velocity.
Oh, now we're talking deltas. I think it's a bit about the speed of psychology and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and how somebody flows up that hierarchy, and how fast AI is moving. So to get people psychologically to start thinking this way requires a lot of experience. You have to bounce yourself against the world a little bit, see what the world feeds you back, ask yourself a lot of questions, test some things out, iterate. It's not unlike a startup in some ways. And then there's AI, which is displacing people as we speak and moving at an ever faster with deep learning, exponential curve. And are we going to be able to get the answers to these questions for the truckers that are going to get replaced in the next 5 to 10 years? Are they going to do the soul searching and come up with the answer before AI comes in and says, off you are?
I'm going to point that question to you, David.
Personally, I think we're not. I think speed is the real problem. Technology is advancing at incredible speed at the moment, more so than we've ever seen digital technology advance. There's quite a number of reasons for that. One is Moore's law, where in effect, technology doubles in capability about every couple of years. But especially, as you say, the developments we've made in neural networks and in artificial intelligence have led to, in particular areas, unbelievable breakthroughs in technology. And actually things are moving very, very fast. And what's happening in the jobs market is exactly as you say. In the old days, by which I mean all the time from year 0 to about 1990, we invented a new technology. It put some people out of work, but after a while, we'd invented some new jobs for those people to do, and the world grew and expanded. Since about the 1990s, and this is not just me quoting this, there's a very good MIT study which shows this, technology seems to be getting faster a bit too fast. That almost as soon as we invent a new job, technology seems to be able to do it. A good example in my business, and I've worked in the print media for almost all my career, is that when I started, there were these people called hot metal typesetters, which set typography in printing, and they had a proper job. They had training and apprenticeships and a growth through their career. And then Apple invented the Apple Mac and the user interface that was about, and desktop publishing, and in an instant they lost their jobs. But many of them became website designers because this was a completely new job that no one knew. We didn't even know what a website was, let alone a website designer. And suddenly the internet came along and we had websites. Now, most website design is done by AI. It's done online on those services, Wix and Squarespace and whatever. So now we've got a new job that the computers took a previous job out, and the new job now has been eroded. And faster and faster and faster, this cycle is going to happen. And I think the truth is, when we think about the truckers or whatever, we won't, because I don't think we're prepared culturally and as our society ready for this enormous change in the world of work, because we expect there be certain jobs and somehow governments promise those jobs. Now, two things are going to happen, I think. One is that we will get to a point that even if the technology is available, people might not lose their jobs because of this, because there has to be some sort of human change as well. And a good example is the PC was invented in the middle 80s. I think, is that
You
right?
wrote an article that's saying about the death of offices.
Well, I wrote an article in 1989 about this new thing called the modem, which had been invented. How within 2 years there won't be any offices because there won't be any documents. We'll all be at home, sharing this thing around this modem. And indeed, we're all surrounded by paper in offices. So there's a human resistance to taking on the opportunity of technology. And in fact, what happened in the 80s was actually when, even though PCs were around, there were still a lot of secretaries certainly in American corporations and British corporations. And it was only in the economic recession of the 1990s, the early 1990s, when lots of people were laid off, that suddenly lots of PCs came into offices and those secretaries lost their job. So it may well be that we do get self-driving trucks, but for whatever reason, political, cultural, inertial, we don't let them take away the jobs. But then you get a recession and suddenly it's economically dumb to employ a lorry driver. And at that point is when I think we need to be, all those lorry drivers and all of us need to have that question, what does it mean for me to be in work? What do I look for in work, and to have that conversation with ourselves?
Great, thank you. We'll take one last question. I think there was a hand up, yeah. Yeah, I think you had your hand up first.
Hi, I'm Mary. Thank you very much. It's been fascinating tonight. I have a question. I think it's kind of related to that, but it's what, David, you touched about it just at the end, but what's the one thing that you would change in our education system that might start that process earlier of people asking the question?
So before you answer that, just going to be conscious of the time. We're going to try and
that's why I said one thing.
Get to the root of the answer, because I'm just thinking, oh shit, we just opened a whole kind of word. Yeah, do you want to get a crack?
Have you got any answers to that, Thomas?
Yeah, I'll let you do it. But
okay, so I don't have kids, so I don't have a direct recent connection with the education system, so I'm speaking a little bit about my own experience in education and also as a teacher. I think that there's a kind of one thing that the education system should cultivate in people, and that's, I've said it again, emotional intelligence, and in particular emotional intelligence, which I would call curiosity. I think actually that the world is changing faster and faster and faster. It's very exciting, the world. And actually the big skill all of us need, and certainly kids and students need when they're entering, especially the world of work, is a kind of curiosity to be able to ask the question, not only about, what's this about? How can I do this in a different way? Which we usually say something like creativity in work. But what will this work, be like in 10 years' time? And I think we need to be interested in asking that question rather than terrified of asking. I do believe, I write articles for magazines, and I do believe there's already software which writes articles for newspapers. They're short and they're rather boring. I really believe in 10 years' time there'll be software which kind of writes I was going to say the good quality articles I write, but that's someone else's judgment. The quality of articles that I'm being asked to write in magazines. And then I'll have to say, well, what do I do for work? Because that software will be cheaper. I need a curiosity about, I'm 54 now, what will happen when I'm 64? What will the world be like? And so I think in education we need to cultivate and really enjoy it when kids are curious about things.
There's something about what you're speaking to, which is around also adaptability, which I'm hearing a lot from the conversation from both of you tonight, which is kind of having this ability to actually, if you're being rigid and if you're too stuck in your own ways, then the future is probably going to be scary and what's coming might not be as comfortable as you'd like to be. But if you have this kind of curiosity mindset and aware and to be adaptable, then I think it's about how can you find the excitement in this new opportunity that comes arise, whether that's a change in jobs or what have you. So we're going to close the Q&A, but we're going to have a bit of a moment at the end where we can kind of mingle around, and I'm sure David and Thomas would be happy to hang around for a few minutes and if you had a few questions. So just before we wrap up, please give a big round of applause for Thomas and David. Thank you very much.